Hello everybody. So I thought today to do a little cricket message. I think I got my wires crossed a bit. I thought Australia was touring India, but apparently India is coming back to Australia. It's been an interesting one because a couple of years ago India came here, and that was while, of course, Steve Smith and David Warner were still banned, along with Cameron Bancroft, but Bancroft didn't really make a big difference to Australia's lineup. Without Smith and Warner, of course, India won in Australia. Now, it was a reasonably close series. Trying to think how it went. I think India just barely won the first test in Adelaide as a result of using DRS really well, and of course a big score from Pujara. And then I think Australia won back. I think we had a draw and then we won back, and then we lost in Sydney and had a draw, and I think it was 2-1 from 5 tests. I seem to remember we won in Perth, lost in Adelaide, and I think we lost in Sydney as well. It may have been 3-1 actually, come to think of it. I think we might have lost in Melbourne as well, but it was a while ago. I can't remember the exact way that it went, but certainly India won. And it was a fairly close series, but it was India's first ever Test series win in Australia. It was a big deal. And look, we can perhaps dampen that by saying, well, Smith and Warner were out. Not just injured, but out because they're banned. And that does dampen it significantly. And I guess in a lot of ways, India is sort of saying, well, they're back now. We want to see if we can still beat them with Smith and Warner. And I'm sure Indian fans will say, well, yes, they can. India haven't really gotten any worse in that time. So the only question is whether Australia have gotten better and better enough to overcome that deficit. So it's not just about the players, it's also about the feeling, the way things are going and so forth. I mean, Australia won the Ashes in England, and there's been a lot of good things happen for Australia, Australian cricket, since that time. Not all good, there've been a few lows as well, but it's been generally pretty good. But still pretty good for India. And if you look on the newfangled World Test table with the different scores, India's number 1, Australia's number 2. So this is essentially a battle for top spot. I mean, India will still be number 1 even if they lose 5-0, but that's because that's the way the rather silly system works. I don't agree with the way the points are distributed. So anyway, I sort of looked at that, and look, it's all really bizarre right now because we're in COVID and we're in lockdowns, we're playing to empty stadiums. But in Australia, we actually might get a few people. Now, they won't be from India, unless, of course, they are living in Australia and have been living in Australia for years. And there are Indians that live in Australia for 20 years. So you will still get some Indians in the crowd. But it probably won't be as many, and you won't be getting people that have flown from India because, well, I suppose in theory they might be allowed to, but I don't believe we're allowing that. We're only allowing people to come in if they're native to Australia, if that's where they live as citizens at the very least, if not having been born here. At the minimum, I think we've got to be residents. So there might be some people that are residents of Australia that were living in India for a little while, they'll come back, that kind of thing. But I think we'll get crowds that'll be more Australian and less Indian. And while I believe that Melbourne is still not allowing crowds, most of the other parts of Australia will. And they're not going to be full crowds, but they'll be a bit. And it's an interesting thing because it's really hard to get a judge on form right now. Australia announced 17-man squad, just incredible. I mean, that's a huge squad. And I've noticed that they've got Will Pucovski in there now. We've been talking about him for a couple of years now. And he scored a mountain of runs previously. Was really should have been playing Test cricket, but he's very young as well. But the problem was that then he had some kind of mental breakdown, and we never got told exactly what happened. But essentially, he withdrew himself from Test consideration right when he was probably going to make his Test debut. And then now he's made 2 double centuries in 2 matches. which is a lot of runs, but it's also just 2 matches, and you kind of want consistency over a period of time. But Joe Burns, some people say, well, he hasn't done very much in that time, but he actually did score a couple of centuries earlier in the season, and he's not that much out of form. Plus, he's done well at Test level. He's been partnering Warner well, so there's a thought that, well, while Pucovski has done better than Burns, Burns hasn't done so badly to warrant being dropped. And that's a bit of a tough question. Then, of course, we know we've got Marnus Labuschagne, number 3. He's going to be there no matter what. Steve Smith at number 4, you can lock that in. Now, Travis Head at number 5 is an interesting one because he's sort of fairly safely in there, but he's not so safely that 2 or 3 bad matches couldn't see him out of the side. I think he'd probably... he doesn't have to do much to stay in the side for the whole series, but you know, there's a chance that he could be missing out. Then you got Matthew Wade, who's probably on a bit shakier ground. And Will Pucovski has played down the order, and there is a chance that he would replace Wade. And then we have Cameron Green also in the squad. He's had a really good season, but hasn't really had that consistency over a long period of time. So I'm not seeing Green playing, but we've also got a possibility that we'll play an extra bowler. We've got a couple of all-rounders in the side, bowling all-rounders, in Sean Abbott and Michael Neser. Now, Neser's probably pretty close to Test level, pretty unlucky not to have played already. Abbott's probably not really at that level at the moment. We're also obviously going to have Tim Payne in there as keeper, wicket keeper and captain. We've got Mitchell Swepson, and he's had a great season, and Nathan Lyon. And then we've got we've got the 4 fast bowlers we've had for a little while. And I guess the reason we're having 17 is because they're not going to be able to stay in their home cities and just be flown in. Because of the nature of COVID, they're all going to have to travel together. So in a sense, it's kind of like, even though we're the home side, we're kind of on tour as well. And having that bio bubble, they call it. So they're going to hang around with each other, but nobody else for while they're doing it. So they're not going to go out to pubs, they're not going to mix it. They're going to have all these rules about it. Even though Australia's now down to pretty much no cases. India came and they agreed to do a 2-week isolation, to undergo all the tests and all that sort of stuff, and they've agreed to do it. So they're all good. Now, it's an interesting scenario because ordinarily I'd probably say, oh, India's going to lose badly. But India won in Australia, that's one factor. And also the COVID situation creates a new dynamic. And we can't really look at form. We can sort of say, well, these are good players. And I'm not sure that home ground advantage really matters when there's no crowd, or a very small crowd perhaps. Some grounds will probably be played to no crowd. I don't know if Melbourne will be allowing crowds by the time that they have a match, and I'm not sure if we're playing in Melbourne either. But some of them will have some crowd, but they're not going to be 100,000 people. They're going to be like 5,000, 10,000, that sort of thing. And it's going to be very weird. Look, if India were to win, and we'd probably say, oh, well, that's because of COVID-19. But I also think if India were to win with Smith and Warner, I don't think we could have an excuse. We could say COVID-19, but I don't think we'd believe it. And look, India have a chance of winning. Virat Kohli's still wonderful. Pujara's still amazing. They still have those great bowlers that were doing really well and doing well overseas as well. And they've been so consistent. I think this is going to be a really hard series for Australia to win. Australia could win, don't get me wrong. And probably will be favourites. But it's not so obvious as it might have been in previous years. And I mean, you can't deny that India have won pretty much every series they've had. Now, we all had this time off. Probably would have played a few more matches. I'm not sure what the schedule was exactly, but it suddenly was wiped clean when COVID-19 came out. We've only just started to play a little bit in a very reserved way since then. So it's hard to know what'll happen then. But anyway, we'll see what happens with all of that. I got really confused and thought they were playing in India, so got corrected there pretty heavily. I feel a bit silly. Looking forward to it, so we'll see what happens. All right, bye-bye now.